This program is brought to you by First National Bank of Botswana.
FNB, how can we help you?
When running a business means
Where did I put that receipt?
we can help you with instant accounting, free software that does your bookkeeping for you. When running a business means
Wait, what do you mean the container hasn't arrived?
we help protect your business from risk with Mohwebi Insurance. And when it means
How do we pay our staff that don't have bank accounts?
we help you make multiple payments directly to people's phones with e-wallet bulk send. At FNB, we're constantly innovating to help business owners at every stage of their journey.
Rwanda is considered one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. In fact, the exponential growth of this country's economy has earned it the nickname the Singapore of Africa. In just under 15 years, Rwanda has been able to boast one of the best airlines in the world, Rwanda Air, diversify the economy to tea and coffee, being the biggest exports for the country. Africa to Africa reports that education, healthcare and life expectancy levels have all improved. On the politics and policies front, Rwanda holds the largest number of women in parliament in the world at 64%. A fundamental reason for this economic upsurge is the ingenuity, courage and competency demonstrated by the country's leadership towards a common goal. These are the thoughts of our guest tonight, economist global markets with RMB Daniel Kavishe. Daniel detailed how Rwanda was able to rise from the ashes of economic hopelessness to become an economic powerhouse in the whole of Africa.
I have the case study of Rwanda. Rwanda, as you're all well aware, came from a genocide in the early 90s. It was a particularly difficult time because in a short period of about 2-3 months, they lost over 1 million people. This is hard to stomach for any single economy. And very quickly, they had to introduce not only policies, but strategies to ensure that they could rebound from that situation, but then also that they could become global contenders. What I have up there are simple graphs that show the state of the Rwandan economy. One of the first things you will notice is that it's consistently growing by about 8%. Give or take a few fluctuations over the past few years. One thing that you do find, however, as well, is that that is not necessarily reliant on what is taking place in the mining segment, as I'll come and show you. It has a lot to do with the focus that they've had over the past few years, which is to focus on the people and to create an identity of the people who understand where it is they're going and to have that subsumed amongst every single individual in that environment. The other thing, though, that you will notice is that from a currency perspective, they're pretty much the same as you will find in Botswana. They have a currency that's depreciating pretty much at the same rate as Botswana has over the past 10 years. So there's really no big distinction there. On the other side, which is also on a fiscal level, you will note that their debt has been ramping up. So total debt, because compared to GDP, is hovering at about 45, teetering closer to 55%, which is actually much higher than what you would find in other countries. Also, at the same time, they've managed to contain inflation to levels which are longer, hovering at about 4 to 6%. Again, Botswana seems to be fairly better if you are targeting much lower inflation versus them. And so the question comes then, given that their economy pretty much looks the same as that of Botswana, with a slight caveat that they're growing at an aggressively much faster rate, what are some of the things that they have managed to do? To put it in context, the Botswana economy is around about 16 to 17 billion and will rightly air closer to 18 billion by the end of this year in US dollars. Rwanda is the size of half of that. So part of their growth rate, one could argue, is that it's coming from a particularly low base. But I've become cautious as an economist to always target and speak about the fact that people are growing from a low base. Maybe they are actually doing something different. The core focus is ensuring that they generate as much capacity amongst their people such that they are contenders within the region in all forms of manner. And I mean everything from education, everything from ensuring that health is secured within the country, but at the same time, they're creating an environment which is open particularly for business. The big question is, how much do they actually focus on their fiscus in ensuring these two things? It's 57% of their budget goes towards focusing on basically these two criteria. If you move over to your governance infrastructure or transformational pillar, you come and see something particularly similar. A long set of lists of different policies that they need to implement to ensure that they create a governance structure, but you start seeing that it has a much smaller focus from a government perspective. Why? Because over the past consecutive years, they've managed to lift and ensure that they have a system that works on the basis of accountability and transparency. But when you actually see it in practice, it means that the level of operation that you would find in a private company is the same that is expected within government. And that is a switch in thinking in terms of how it is you govern your economy. And so the next pillar, which they focus on as well, looks at something particularly simpler, which is social transformation. And that, as you can see, is taking an even much smaller portion of your budget of just about 16%. And what we have often found in jurisdictions like Botswana, Namibia, and even in cases of South Africa, is we tend to balloon most of our budget towards social projects, because this is what has become popular, and obviously this is what that has allowed several governments to get re-elected. But a point comes when you need to focus on that which will allow you to consistently preserve the growth that you have in your foreign reserves, but then at the same time also to preserve the level of growth that you are targeting. So government takes a much smaller portion. This is after 10 years, in which it used to stand at about 80% of government. They've managed to reduce that to about 16. And so the immediate question is, how do they actually allocate their funds? But if you look at the split between the revenue and the expenditure, one of the things that you will note is from a tax basis, they have managed to diversify from one single tax source. They focus mainly on taxes as they were designed, which is to tax consumption, the usage of you and I using commodities. A lot of times as economies, we have become quite comfortable with taxing production with the hope that this will come and generate revenue. But you find that they've moved away from that. They actually start taxing at the end what you and I consume. And they've managed to diversify that as well, of course, with the fact that they are still reliant on grants across the country, grants from various countries, which for Botswana, you can be cautioned to say that at least you don't have that particular problem as they've had. But what it has allowed them to do is that it has removed dependency on one specific resource or one specific sector in terms of them being able to generate revenue. What I found particularly interesting, though, was more on the expenditure side. Most of our economies have an expenditure that is based on basically the wage bill. And it tends to hover of between 40 to 60% in most of the sub-Saharan African countries, at least those closer to SACU and SADC. What they've managed to do over the past few years is significantly reduce that. And why have they done that? Is because they realize that the focus of any economy must not necessarily be government. Government is only there to allow and enable businesses and individuals to maximize the opportunities that they've been given. Again, I'm well aware that these are very unpopular views, but this is the cost and sacrifice that it takes to get to some of the growth rates that we see. And so we start off with the story of the president. But I think very critical to the story of Rwanda is the man that you see behind us. What we have found is that in a lot of his studies, he immediately made sure, post-genocide, to inculcate a culture that the country knew exactly where it is that they were going. Last year in Namibia, there was a conference, and we had a few members from the Rwandan delegation speaking. And each one of them could associate with two specific targets that they knew they had to focus on before they could reach their vision 2036. The first thing they said is that they need to ensure that unemployment is basically down to zero, which is your traditional 4% in economics. And secondly, to ensure that every international company that operates in the environment is there to maximize most of their export earnings because they are concerned about their growing current account deficits that they've had over the past few years. Two things, nothing much. I think the problem that we tend to have is that we convolute most of our discussions by having too many targets. And sometimes that can be a distraction in itself.
When running a business means
Where did I put that receipt?
we can help you with instant accounting, free software that does your bookkeeping for you. When running a business means
Wait, what do you mean the container hasn't arrived?
we help protect your business from risk with Mohwebi Insurance. And when it means
How do we pay our staff that don't have bank accounts?
we help you make multiple payments directly to people's phones with e-wallet bulk send. At FNB, we're constantly innovating to help business owners at every stage of their journey.
The world has been brought to a state of panic amid the outbreak of a new coronavirus from mainland China. The first case of this fatal virus was reported on December 31st, 2019 in Wuhan, presenting very similar symptoms to your normal cold. To date, news portals report that there have been more than 1,000 fatalities, with the World Health Organization rendering the outbreak a global crisis. While human lives are at stake, world economies predict that if the situation is not arrested on time, markets will be brought to their knees. The Guardian Online reports that there are already fresh signs that the infection is hitting economic growth and corporate profits. It is reported that manufacturing will bear the most brunt, as there are disruptions in Chinese factories where many workers have been advised to stay home. The picture painted for international markets seems all too bleak, but how does the situation at hand affect those in business here locally? Case in point, the Chinese commerce fraternity, who get most of their products, if not all of them, from China. The general consensus on the street is to avoid all Chinese shops, restaurants, or any other service outlets like the plague, as they're feared to carry the virus. We spoke to the president of the Oriental Plaza, Chen Jianfei, who says generally nothing has changed at the Oriental Plaza. He says each year from January to around March, there isn't much business as people are still recovering from festive spending and the back-to-school expenses. The coronavirus, has it affected business at the Oriental Plaza?
Not really, okay? I think so. Oriental Plaza is not a problem. Because I also looking here, also there's many customers coming to Oriental Plaza here. But I want to talk to you one question. Because after Christmas, not many people got some more money to buy some stock. Because he got a family. He want go to pay for school fee and different things, you understand? But I think so for Oriental Plaza here, business is not a problem.
Worst case scenario, what do you think would happen if the situation does not change?
I think so, it's the same. Because in China, government is very serious. He control this virus. Because many people, New Year's now, from China, he coming to Botswana. And then for governments, he talk, even for China embassy, also talking to Chinese people, even for some non-citizen people. If he coming to here, he must very serious stay in the home for 40 days, 14 days. Because he can't move, even move, maybe problem for him, because he go to some more airports, maybe Hong Kong, maybe South African airport, because not many people. If he stay here for 14 days, it's better for all the people.
When running a business means
Where did I put that receipt?
we can help you with instant accounting, free software that does your bookkeeping for you. When running a business means
Wait, what do you mean the container hasn't arrived?
we help protect your business from risk with Mohwebi Insurance. And when it means
How do we pay our staff that don't have bank accounts?
we help you make multiple payments directly to people's phones with e-wallet bulk send. At FNB, we're constantly innovating to help business owners at every stage of their journey.
Our day-to-day lives are characterized by a lot of paperwork, which also includes signing contracts for various undertakings. Take, for example, a young professional starting out in the world of work, signing on that job offer and then over time steadily climbing the corporate ladder with even more signings of various contracts. As the years pass, the individual accrues a lot for themselves. Properties, shares, land, cars, all through a process that will require them to sign on a contractual agreement. All these contracts are signed with a certain level of understanding, especially of the consequences of such undertakings. This individual then decides to get married, and for whatever reason, the same due diligence is occasionally not afforded to this type of undertaking. Which brings us to our topic of discussion tonight, the contract of marriage that seems to elude a lot of individuals. On this background, we wish to understand what the contract of a joint estate means. This is especially in cases of such instances as the one we just painted. We realize the waters we're trying to snorkel are quite murky, hence why we have sought the expertise of a lawyer. We host Ramatulai Jalo, who gives us a rundown about what the law says regarding being married in community of property in an ongoing marriage.
What we basically mean by in community of property is basically to be in community of profits and losses. So by that, what we mean is the parties enter into a common pool where all of my properties and all of my spouse's properties are basically named a joint estate. So that's basically what we mean by in community of property. So of profits and of losses. So for example, if you're married in community of property and you have retired from work and your pension has accrued whilst you are married, this forms part of the joint estate and is liable to be shared between the parties. So yes, basically anything that the parties get becomes subsumed in this common pool, and it's not just in relation to the benefits but also in relation to the losses as well. So you'll find that if you as a spouse enter into a transaction in your personal names where you then incur a debt or a liability, it can be you are sued, and when you are sued, it affects your partner because you are one, you're in a joint pool.
Perhaps you could speak about the entitlements of each party to the other and from the other person when they're still in that contract.
Well, basically, when you're married in community of property, this is a term that has sort of changed. Before, the implications were that when you are married in community of property, you'd need the consent of your spouse for things like opening a bank account. If you were a woman, for example, you were seen to be a minor under the law, so you couldn't do anything by yourself. But slowly, with the development of the law, we had a piece of legislation called the Abolition of Marital Power Act, which sort of freed the woman in the marriage. So you are able to enter into different transactions. You are equally as a man and as a woman. However, if you're married in community of property, you would need spousal consent. So if you enter into a transaction that will affect your common pool, say you enter into, like what we were talking about earlier, into a contract in your personal capacity and you incur a debt, then all of these transactions that may do harm to the joint estate would need the consent of your other spouse. So basically that would sort of be your relationship, where for some acts that would be to the detriment of the joint estate, you'd need your spouse to consent to that. But for certain transactions, you wouldn't need your spouse's consent. So say you enter into some contracts, but in terms of your profession, say you're a lawyer and you have to negotiate a deal between two parties, you wouldn't need spousal consent for that. So there are areas where you can act as an individual, for example, where it is in relation to your profession as a single person. But then there are instances where you would need your spouse's consent, specifically where it affects your joint pool of properties, of immovable properties, movable properties. And when we talk about these things, we're talking about even shares, we're talking about vehicles, we're talking about various properties. So there's that dynamic. And in relation to community of property, you might ask, what if I can't get my spouse's consent? What if they decide to withhold it? But then you have a remedy in that regard. You can approach the court and say to the court, listen, this consent is being unreasonably withheld. Maybe in that particular instance, there's no harm that might be done to the joint estate. And in that regard, the court would easily be able to assist and say that person's consent is no longer needed.
We have come to the end of tonight's episode. We wish you pleasant viewing. Until next time, take care and good night. This program was brought to you by First National Bank of Botswana.
FNB, how can we help you?